we're not on this precious untouched blue marble. We're
Mm.
on we're on a spherical city that across multiple generations has been engineered based on our own needs and desires.
Liam, I've seen your work in quite a few instances now, for the first time at the NGV Triennial a few years ago, and then I went to your exhibition, Planetary Redesign, at NGV Australia. And I think for me, what really touches me about your work is that you zoom out so much to look at the macro view of building a future planet and a future city, but you also put so much detail in there at the micro level. Like for planetary redesign, you had the number of heads of lettuce and the number of birthday parties. Like, why is that amount of detail important for you in your practice?
I often describe my work as an artist as world building, meaning that, I don't paint pictures, I don't make sculptures. Instead, I work through the medium of imaginary worlds. And worlds are complex and intricate things. And what makes a world believable and feel immersive is when you don't see its edges. And that means that the closer you look at it, you still have to be inside that story. So everything from the most minute detail needs to exist within the logic of the larger fiction of the world. So everything from top down, the structures, the organization of that world, and its ideology, its politics, its architecture, as well as its detail, the microcosm of cultures and subcultures within it, what people wear, what devices they use. That's what makes world building feel consistent, and consistency is in the end what makes imaginary worlds feel immersive and believable.
And in order to do that, you work with so many different artists and designers and collaborators. Like for the Planetary Redesign show, you had people also show the costume design, which is absolutely amazing. I'm wondering, has collaboration always come quite naturally to you?
World building is inherently a collaborative act. Making a world is a big undertaking, so it's best not done alone. And as I mentioned, when you start to think about a world, you've got to think about all of these different ecologies that exist within it, natural and ecological, as well as social ecologies and political ecologies. And that inherently means that, any single person can't contain all of that in their head at any one time. So collaboration is really the way that I develop projects. And something like Planet City, the design and imagining of a single city for the entire population of the Earth, was a project born out of conversations with what I call the City Council, which is a global network of science fiction authors and political theorists, ecologists, scientists, technologists, as well as fashion designers, costume designers, craftspeople, folklorists, First Nations communities, musicians, and so on. So I try and touch on all of these different aspects when we start to build a fiction. What do people wear, and what's their daily life like? What do they eat? What what's inside their pockets? What are their clothes made out of? Is it made out of natural fibers or scavenged material or recycled T-shirts that have been thrown away after they were worn once and stretched out because H&M doesn't make T-shirts to last more than 2 washes? All of these things are part of the narrative of world making, and to engage scientists and community organizations and so on in the authoring and the birthing of these worlds is a part of what I think is important to do. So it also doesn't feel like some singular artist vision. The iconic napkin sketch isn't really what world building is about. It's about finding consensus and bringing a whole lot of people together and collectively authoring something. And that's what's important to me about the practice.
Through your practice and through your work of looking at what the future of the planet and the population might be, but also, you assess so much of the problems that we have now in our planet, that obviously influences the trajectory of the future. Does your practice make you hopeful in any sense, or does it kind of make you more pessimistic?
I think any reasonable person finds it extraordinarily difficult to be hopeful in this present moment when all evidence points to the fact that things are going to get a lot worse rather than better. But really, I think the project of our generation is to try and find ways to be hopeful. As Rebecca Solnit puts it, to find hope in the dark. That's really the challenge of our age, because this is what we desperately need, is to find new narratives that somehow will help us, dig out of the hole that we've created for ourselves. What in the end gives me hope, and I like to argue that I'm a radical optimist, even though some of the projects seem rather dark. I hope that they're provocative, and they're really works of extreme pragmatism. We don't have time to mess around anymore. So I'm not an idealist, I'm a realist, and I'm like, what are the things that we can legitimately make happen today that might help to enact a better future? And that's what I want to tell stories about. So I often talk about this idea that climate change is no longer a technological problem. In fact, we've created all of the systems, all of the knowledge, all of the devices and technology we need to reverse this polycrisis that we're in. Already, in many cases, these systems, these technologies have been around for 10 or 15 years. They're proven, they're understood. Climate change is now a political problem. It's a crisis of the imagination, not a crisis of technology. And that is both despairing, the idea that we've had these solutions, they're hiding in plain sight, and it's our own political prejudices, blind spots, biases that keep them down. But it's also an incredibly powerful position to occupy, when we could all wake up tomorrow and collectively decide to do everything we needed to do, and there'd be nothing stopping us. So we're not going to, which is why it's dark at the moment, but we could. And that is a really unique moment where we're the first generation that both have the solutions and a sufficient understanding of the problem. So there is hope somewhere in there if you really scratch the surface. And it's our duty in many ways to try and find and empower people to be hopeful. And, if climate change, again, isn't a problem of technology, but it's a problem of culture, then cultural work and cultural practitioners are really on the front lines of something like climate change. So I really think there's an extraordinary role that artists have to play, as well as designers and musicians and storytellers and so on, because really that's where we're at, is trying to find a way to get everyone on board with this idea, especially in the States where I'm based, in Los Angeles, where it's still impossible to agree on whether climate change is real or not.
Yeah, I remember reading about the idea that speaks to what you were saying a little bit, that there's sort of this cognitive dissonance when people think about climate as a whole. Almost, it's all around us, and it's almost too big for us to imagine, to make it a very solid concept. And the writer was saying that if everyone might have the opportunity to see the Earth from outer space as this entity, it actually might make the connection of what this actually means for the planet that we inhabit. But I also think, as you said, art can have this power to make people realize what this actually is and what they're trying to understand, without having to shoot people up into space, which is also not very environmentally friendly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, we've had this idea of the Earthrise image. In 1968, we were able to, for the first time, look back in on the Earth, and we saw this precious blue marble in space. And that image was really the beginnings of the ecological movement, right? In the 60s and 70s, environmental movement were based on that ideal, this precious, untouched blue marble floating in the void of space. I think we've blown well past the utility of that kind of image and that kind of thinking. We don't need to get outside of the Earth to realize that we're all on this ship together, and that, the Earth is finite and we keep on digging and extracting and there's not going to be much left. We know these truths already. We still do nothing about it. That, I don't think, is any kind of solution. You kind of need to break capitalism, really, ultimately, is what's required. But it's such a big undertaking. So really what we can do is small, tiny, incremental steps that start to get us there. The building of a carbon economy. which suggests that if you want to pollute, it's going to cost you money. That's a small little incremental thing that we can start to do. Putting in regulation around the end of fossil fuels and just collectively saying that enough is enough and banning them in the same way that when we realized there was a hole in the ozone layer, we got together, we had a big meeting, we said we're going to ban CFCs. We did this. We did these things once. We need to just do it again. And that's really what I argue for is that, we're not on this precious untouched blue marble. We're on a spherical city that across multiple generations has been engineered based on our own needs and desires. And through colonization, never-ending economic extraction, we have remade that sphere as an endless planetary scaled city. It's not some untouched thing anymore. What it means is that we need to use the means that we've created for ourselves to find ways to give back, to create space for other species, to create space for atmospheric engineering and putting carbon back in the ground and not digging it out. It's not about some spiritual awakening that needs to happen. It's about real work that needs to be done. And I think a lot of the narratives around contemporary ecology, unfortunately, don't really tackle that necessity head on. They're still locked in a lot of the failed ideals that come out of boomer environmentalism. The idea that we're all going to retreat to the hills and unplug our Netflix and grow chickens in the backyard. It's just not going to happen, and we don't have time to be fighting for those ideals anymore. We need to be much more pragmatic, and that means finding ways to align with politics, finding ways to bring the left and the right together around shared projects, and finding language that we can all rally behind as opposed to divisive. So I think that's where we're at, really.
And I'd like to learn a little bit more about your work at Artspace in the Monster Clouds exhibition. Have you been to Seoul before?
So yeah, Seoul City Machine came out of a trip to Seoul. It's a city that has the most extraordinary take-up of technology, and I could think of no better place to tell a story around AI governance, like what it means to imagine a city managed by an AI operating system. So Seoul City Machine, the work that's in Artspace, is just that. It explores the idea about what does it mean to have a conversation with a city in the same way you have a conversation with your chatbot, or you talk to ChatGPT or your Amazon Alexa. What does it mean for a city to be watching over you, monitoring what you're doing, in the guise of making it more efficient? So it's one of the first films, although it's pretty common now, but at the time we made it, it was one of the first films written entirely by an AI. An AI that at the time we had to build ourselves, training it on urban protocols and management systems. And it's a letter from that city operating system to the citizens that it manages.
I think it'll be good for us to shift gears a little bit and ask you some of the questions that are a little bit more personal and fun, like in quick fire style. Feel free to give me responses that are quite, candid and straightforward, and you don't need to feel like you need to over-explain yourselves for these kind of ones. I'm going to start off with, what's your most treasured item in your studio?
One thing I've been doing on all these trips around the world that I've been doing on our documentary shoots is collecting rocks. We visit a lot of mine sites, and I collect rocks like from rare earth mineral mines in China, or from iron ore mines in Australia, and I have a whole collection of these geological fragments, each of which are components in the modern city, components in our laptops, our phones, our buildings, and so on. So they're reminders that our technology is geology. So I like to keep them close.
Beautiful. Do you have any weird habits when you work?
I work really late at night. So the witching hour, the magic hour, is actually from midnight until about 5 a.m. That's when all of the thinking and the work happens.
And when do you sleep?
A night owl. I don't sleep much, maybe. That's another weird habit. I can survive on a couple of hours a night. Yeah.
Right. I was going to ask what your artistic superpower is, but it feels like being able to wake up and work productively is one of
Staying
them.
awake is my superpower. Exactly. Yeah.
Beautiful. Do you have a person that's influenced you the most?
I'm a big fan of science fiction. So I read a lot of science fiction writing, and I would say that my biggest influence in my own practice is sci-fi. And that's everything from films to literature. Kim Stanley Robinson is a sci-fi author. I'm fascinated right now by Chinese science fiction authors like Chen Shoufan, Hao Jingfang, who wrote Folding Beijing. These are my biggest inspirations right now.
And what would you say the biggest moment in your career so far is?
I'm still kind of having those moments, I hope, and trying to find ways to scale up and expand everything that we're doing. I would say that my most significant work to date is Planet City, that was originally a commission from Ewan McEwen, one of the curators of the NGV, and that's since gone on to be acquired at New York's MoMA and San Francisco MoMA and museums around the world. So maybe that MoMA acquisition was a big moment for me as an artist.
And is there anything that you would say to your 8-year-old self?
Um, uh, it gets better, but I had a miserable childhood actually, so I would try and tell myself to hang in there, and be hopeful, I guess. And again, it's similar to what we were saying before. Like I think the big challenge for us, for young people, is to find ways to be hopeful and to not be despairing. Yeah, I have a 5-year-old daughter, and hoping that she would somehow be hopeful when
Is
she
she into
understands
the
what that
arts at
means.
all?
Well, I drag her along to all of my exhibitions, so she probably resents the arts right now, but hopefully she will be soon.
You never know, she might grow back into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much. I'll let you get on with the rest of your day. Hopefully you'll get to explore Sydney a little bit. You're there for Vivid, right?
Yeah, I just did a big
Yeah.
live show for Vivid, exactly.
Right, where you were narrating kind of part of the performance.
I call it a live cinema performance
Mm.
where I compose a new film and then I narrate that film live with Forrest Swords, who works on a lot of my original scores, and he was performing a new score for that film live, as well as a vocalist, Eleanor Dixon, who was doing live vocals to go along with it.